The chamber of the Council of Civilized Species was vast, its grand architecture built over centuries by some of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Towering figures of different species occupied their respective seats, their postures radiating confidence, power, and control. At the center of the gathering, standing on a lower platform, were the humans. They were new here. Their representative, Ambassador Daniel Reeves, stood still, his expression calm, unreadable. He was flanked by two other delegates, both silent, both watching. They had received the invitation to join the council, an offer framed as an honor, though everyone in the room knew what it really was. A formality, a subjugation wrapped in diplomatic language. The council speaker, an elder of the Vornak Dominion, tapped the metal staff in his hand against the floor, signaling silence before turning toward Reeves. His elongated pale form shifted slightly as he spoke. Humanity, he said, the translator adjusting his voice into crisp galactic standard. You have been granted a place within our esteemed council. We recognize your steps into space, your attempts at civilization. His dark eyes regarded them with amusement. However, you must understand the nature of your admission. A murmur of agreement spread among the gathered representatives. The Vakari, a towering insectoid species, clicked their mandibles in what was unmistakably condescension. The Dranari, hulking reptilians, let out a low, rumbling chuckle. From the far end of the hall, Ambassador Vraxis of the Zalvari leaned forward. His species had been among the founding members of the council, known for their rigid hierarchical structure and belief in dominance through intelligence. His violet-hued skin shimmered slightly under the chamber lights, his gaze filled with what could only be described as amusement. Humans, he began, his voice smooth, calculated. Your species is an anomaly. You are weaker than the Vakari, slower than the Dranari, less intelligent than the Zalvari. Your lifespans are short, your body's fragile, and your technology is primitive at best. He tilted his head slightly, watching for a reaction. There was none. You are not warriors, he continued. You are not strategists. You are not pioneers of science or engineering. You have accomplished much for your kind, but compared to the great civilizations of this council, you are nothing. But we are generous. We are willing to protect you, to grant you a place under our rule. For your own benefit, of course. Reeves said nothing. His face betrayed nothing. Vraxis leaned back, spreading his clawed hands as if bestowing a gift. In return for our protection, you will submit to certain regulations. Your military development will cease. Your research into advanced weaponry will be monitored and restricted. Your expansion into unregulated space will require approval from this council. The council murmured in agreement. This was how it always was. New species were brought into the fold, their ambitions kept in check before they could ever become a threat. Reeves remained silent, his expression neutral. A Tralnak official, a species known for their exceptional memory and records keeping, shifted in his seat and addressed the humans. Do you understand the terms of your admission? His large, unblinking eyes stared at Reeves expectantly. Reeves finally spoke. Yes, he said. His tone was even, respectful. We understand. There was a pause. Some of the representatives had expected anger, perhaps even a challenge. But humans, it seemed, were at least smart enough to recognize their inferiority. Vraxis smirked. Good, he said. Then you should know that any attempt to act outside these limitations would be unwise. We have no tolerance for defiance. Of course, Reeves said. He even nodded slightly. Humanity has no intention of defying the wisdom of this council. Satisfied, the speaker of the Vornak Dominion once again tapped his staff on the floor. Then it is settled. Humanity is now part of the council under the guidance of its superior members. The vote passed unanimously. The humans had been put in their place. The council moved on to other business, discussions of intergalactic trade agreements, territorial disputes, and technological advancements. Humanity's role in this meeting was now to listen, to follow orders, to know their position among the stars. And so they did. They nodded, they smiled, they agreed to everything, and behind closed doors, they planned. When the meeting concluded, Reeves and his delegation exited the chamber in silence. The other species barely acknowledged them, Some didn't even bother to look at them. What was there to see? As soon as they entered their private transport vessel, the doors sealed shut. A long silence filled the room. Then one of the delegates exhaled. "They think we're weak," she murmured. "They always have," Reeves replied. He walked toward the Iona console, entering a command code that disabled all external transmissions, ensuring no one could listen in. The second delegate leaned forward. "Do you think they suspect?" Reeves shook his head. They see us as beneath them." He turned to face his team, his expression unreadable. "Which is exactly what we want." The room fell into a deeper silence. "We move forward," Reeves said finally. His voice carried no trace of emotion, no anger, no gloating, just certainty. No arguments followed. There was work to do. Humanity had been allowed into the council, but not as equals. They had been placed in shackles disguised as agreements. They had been told to be grateful. They had smiled, accepted the terms, and played their part. But history had shown that when humans were underestimated, it never ended well for the other side. The Drask war fleet emerged from hyperspace, their massive warships blotting out the stars as they approached human space. Hundreds of vessels, each armed with weapons powerful enough to turn entire continents into lifeless wastelands, moved into formation. The fleet commander, High Warlord Krelvok, watched from the bridge of his flagship, confident in his species' superiority. The conquest of Earth would be swift and effortless. The Council had not intervened. Some members had even encouraged the invasion, viewing it as an inevitable lesson for humanity. Their fragile species, so new to the galactic stage, would finally learn its place. Krelvok had heard the whispers, the bets placed on how long Earth would last. A few days, maybe weeks at most. No one had any doubt about the outcome. The fleet's first objective was simple: establish control over the human communication networks and eliminate resistance before it could organize. It was standard procedure. Within minutes, thousands of Drask dropships descended toward the planet's surface, aiming for key military targets, government centers, and population hubs. The invasion had begun. As the first wave of soldiers hit the ground, something felt off. No distress signals, no panicked civilian evacuations, no scrambled military defenses rushing to meet them. Silence. Krelvok frowned as reports came in. They had expected chaos, but the human response was non-existent. He ordered an immediate planetary scan. The results were puzzling. Cities were still intact. No mass evacuations, no public broadcasts. Major population centers were operational, but there was no visible activity. It was as if the planet was waiting. The warlord dismissed his concerns. The humans must have fled underground, he reasoned, or perhaps they had already accepted defeat and were too stunned to resist. It didn't matter. The Drask warriors marched forward. Their soldiers, towering reptilian creatures clad in heavy battle armor, moved through abandoned streets. Their gunships hovered in the sky, scanning for signs of movement. They advanced into the heart of human civilization, expecting surrender, expecting submission. Then the first explosion ripped through their ranks. A hidden charge beneath the pavement detonated, annihilating an entire squad of Drask shock troopers in an instant. A second explosion followed, then a third. Before Krelvok could issue new orders, reports flooded in. Ambushes, traps, disappearing units. His soldiers were not fighting an army in the open. They were being hunted. The warlord gritted his teeth and ordered a full-scale counteroffensive. Drask soldiers pushed forward, firing at shadows, at empty buildings, at unseen enemies. Their sensors struggled to pick up targets. Human resistance wasn't fighting like a traditional army. They were striking and vanishing, moving through the ruined cityscapes like ghosts. The Drask were not used to this. Every species they had conquered before had fallen in the same way. They panicked. They fled. They surrendered. Humanity did none of these things. Instead, they adapted. Krelvok's second-in-command, Commander Vulek, approached with a grim expression. "Sir, we are encountering heavy resistance in all major zones. The humans are—" He hesitated, as if struggling to say the words. "They are coordinated." Krelvok narrowed his eyes. Coordinated? Against an invasion force this large? Vulek nodded, glancing at his datapad. They anticipated our landing zones. They knew where we would strike first, Every step we take, they are waiting. They let us think the cities were abandoned, but they were never empty. He looked up. They let us land. Krelvok felt a rare sensation, unease. He turned back to the holomap, watching as his forces struggled to hold ground in cities that should have fallen within hours. Then a new report came through. "Sir," an officer called out, his voice trembling, "we are detecting unauthorized access to our fleet systems." Krelvok froze. "Explain." The officer swallowed. "The humans, they are hacking our ships." The warlord's claws dug into the command console. "Impossible. Their technology is primitive." The officer hesitated. "Not as primitive as we thought." Krelvok turned sharply toward the viewport. Something felt terribly wrong. He had assumed this would be like every other conquest. He had assumed humanity was weak. He had assumed wrong. And for the first time in his life, he realized he was the one being hunted. The Drask ground forces moved cautiously through the ruined streets, their towering forms casting long shadows against the wreckage of the human city. Their scanners flickered with static, their comm channels filled with broken transmissions. The air was thick with dust, the aftermath of their orbital bombardments still settling over the landscape. They had expected resistance, but not like this. There were no screaming civilians, no panicked soldiers firing wildly in retreat. There was only silence, the eerie, unnatural kind that made even seasoned warriors grip their weapons tighter. A squad moved into position, sweeping through what remained of a human military outpost. The facility had been hit by the first wave of the invasion, its walls blackened, its infrastructure seemingly destroyed. But the Drask had learned that nothing was ever as it seemed on this planet. The squad leader, Captain Jorlak, signaled his unit forward. Their weapons scanned every corner, their eyes darting over every shadow. The humans were here. They had to be. One of the Drask warriors stepped toward a pile of rubble, his clawed feet crunching against shattered glass. He paused, his gaze narrowing at something half buried beneath the debris. A discarded human rifle, its barrel blackened, its frame cracked. A trap. Before he could react, the ground beneath him collapsed in an explosion of dust and steel. The floor had been rigged, and the Drask warrior vanished into a pit of jagged rebar and waiting fire. The squad barely had time to register what had happened before gunfire rained down from the rooftops. They scattered, taking cover behind wreckage, their thick armor shielding them from the worst of the incoming rounds. The Drask were used to warfare, to facing enemies head-on. But the humans didn't fight like warriors. They fought like predators. From the buildings above, figures moved in the darkness. Snipers picked off exposed Drask one by one, their shots impossibly precise. Every time a soldier hesitated, he died. Every attempt to regroup was met with an explosion, a sudden burst of movement, a quick and efficient kill. Jorlak barked orders, his voice sharp with frustration. "Advance! Suppress their fire and take the buildings." His warriors moved as commanded, their heavy weapons unleashing a storm of energy rounds into the surrounding structures. But the humans were already gone. They never stayed in one place long enough to be caught. The squad pressed forward, pushing deeper into the city. The eerie silence returned, broken only by the crackle of flames and the distant echoes of conflict. Then the comms flared to life. A garbled transmission from another unit broke through the interference. "We were ambushed, taking heavy losses. Repeat, they were waiting for us." The message cut out, replaced by static. Jorlak clenched his jaw. The reports were getting worse. Entire units were disappearing. Squads were going dark within minutes of deployment. Ships were being hijacked. Weapons stolen. Every battle followed the same pattern. The humans were bleeding them dry, bit by bit, before vanishing into the shadows. A soldier to Jorlak's left suddenly staggered back, a clean hole drilled through his helmet. His body crumpled before he could make a sound. "Sniper." The remaining warriors turned, scanning the rooftops for movement. There was nothing. The humans had already relocated. Jorlak activated his helmet's long-range scanners, switching through different vision modes. Thermal imaging revealed vague heat signatures, but they were constantly shifting, as if the humans had anticipated the technology and had ways to mask their presence. Another explosion ripped through the street, sending bodies flying. Jorlak hit the ground hard, his armor taking the brunt of the blast. He struggled to rise, his ears ringing, his vision blurred. And then the transmission came through. Not from the Drask fleet, not from his own commanders, from them. The voice crackled through every active comm channel, impossibly clear. You wanted a war? Fine. A brief pause. Let's see how long you last. Then silence. Yorlak felt a chill run down his spine. The humans were not defending themselves anymore. They were hunting them. The Drask war machine was faltering. Their forces, once an unstoppable tide of destruction, were now bogged down in a war they had never expected. The humans refused to break. Their cities, battered and scarred, remained standing. Their armies, smaller in number, adapted too quickly for the Drask to anticipate. Every engagement, every battlefield, every tactic that had worked for the Drask against countless other species failed against humanity. High Warlord Krelvok stood in his war room, staring at the holographic battle map with cold fury. His forces had landed on multiple continents, secured key points, and should have overwhelmed the enemy in a matter of weeks. But instead, his occupation forces were dwindling. His best warriors were falling, not in grand battles, but in the shadows, picked apart by an enemy that refused to fight by any rules the Drask understood. A fleet commander's voice crackled through the comms. Warlord, our casualties have increased by 36% in the past 2 weeks. Entire battalions have gone dark. The humans are... The officer hesitated, searching for the right word. They are... relentless. Krelvok's claws gripped the edge of the war table. He had seen the reports. His forces weren't just losing battles, they were being undone at every level. The humans did not retreat. They did not surrender. They did not stop fighting, even when it should have been over. A Drask infantry division had managed to secure a human city after weeks of brutal fighting. The moment they raised their banners over it, the attack started. Not from organized military forces, but from civilians. Ambushes, booby traps, snipers picking off officers one by one. Soldiers found their food supplies poisoned, their vehicles sabotaged. They couldn't occupy human territory because the humans turned their own cities into traps. The warlords had underestimated humanity's ability to fight when cornered. It was a mistake they could no longer correct. Drask battle groups were spread thin across the planet. In space, their fleets still held superiority, but what good was that if they couldn't even hold the ground they stood on? The humans had discovered every weakness in their technology. They had hacked communication systems, stolen weapons, and turned Drask vehicles against their own commanders. Krelvok had reviewed one such incident personally. A human squad, severely outnumbered and cut off from support, should have surrendered. Instead, they had infiltrated a captured Drask compound, disguised themselves as wounded prisoners, overpowered their guards, and commandeered an entire artillery platform. They used it to bombard Drask reinforcements before retreating into the forest. The pattern was always the same. The Drask took ground. The humans disappeared. Then the real war began. A Drask officer, his breathing heavy with exhaustion, sent a priority transmission from the front lines. Warlord, our position has been compromised. The humans... A sudden blast cut him off. The feed turned to static. Seconds later, another voice cut in. Not Drask. Human. You are not the hunters here, the voice said, calm and emotionless. You are the prey. Silence followed. Krelvok's officers stared at the transmission in stunned disbelief. The humans had intercepted their communication lines again. This was not an occupation anymore. This was a hunt. The Drask had attempted to take prisoners early in the war, hoping to use them for leverage or intelligence. But every attempt had ended in disaster. Human prisoners did not act like prisoners. A captured human squad had broken free within a day, murdering their guards, planting explosives in a supply depot, and stealing a transport before vanishing into the wilderness. Another escaped confinement by dislocating their own shoulders, slipping out of their restraints, and overpowering their captors. Krelvok had heard the whispers among his soldiers. They weren't just afraid of the humans' technology or tactics. They were afraid of them. The breaking point came when an entire Drask fleet began experiencing widespread failures. The humans had hacked into their navigation systems, disrupting supply lines and causing ships to drift off course. Entire battalions were stranded, unable to receive reinforcements. Some units simply disappeared. their last known transmissions filled with gunfire, screams, and static. Krelvok's second in command, Commander Vulik, stood stiffly before him. His scales had dulled, a sign of exhaustion. His voice was hollow. "Sir, the men are breaking." The warlord turned, eyes burning. "We are Drask. We do not break." Vulik met his gaze without flinching. "With all due respect, warlord, they are not breaking because they are weak. They are breaking because they have never faced something like this." Silence hung between them. Krelvok closed his eyes for a moment, then turned back to the war table. The data was undeniable. The humans weren't just winning battles, they were breaking the Drask's will to fight. Every strategy, every overwhelming force they had deployed, had only made the humans adapt faster. There was no path to victory anymore. The humans had already won. The only question was how much more the Drask would lose before they admitted it. The council chamber was filled with hushed whispers. The vast hall, logically once a place of absolute authority, now felt uneasy. The towering figures of the various galactic species sat in their high-backed seats, their eyes locked onto the massive holographic display in the center of the room. A battle report streamed across the projection, showing data that should have been impossible. The Drask war machine, once an unstoppable force, was collapsing. Entire fleets had been lost in combat. Strongholds that had been secured weeks ago had fallen overnight. Communications from high-ranking commanders had ceased altogether. A war that had been declared as a swift conquest had turned into an endless nightmare. Ambassador Vraxis of the Zalvari watched the unfolding disaster with growing disbelief. His once calm composure now showed signs of tension. This cannot be accurate," he muttered. A Tralnak records officer, known for their species' meticulous data collection, adjusted the display. "The reports are verified. The Drask Empire has lost over 60% of its invasion fleet. Their ground forces are in complete disarray." The Speaker of the Council, an elder from the Vornak Dominion, spoke with forced calm. "How? How could this happen? The humans should not be capable of this." The answer arrived through another live transmission. It came directly from Drask High Warlord Krelvok. His face appeared on the central display, but he was not the same proud commander who had once declared humanity's doom. His eyes were bloodshot, his scales dulled from exhaustion. His once imposing posture had crumbled into one of desperation. "They are not what we thought," Krelvok rasped. His voice carried the weight of a defeated warrior. "You do not understand. We thought them fragile. We thought them weak. We thought they would break under the might of our forces." Silence filled the chamber. Krelvok continued. "But they do not break. They do not surrender. They learn. They adapt. They fight with a fury that I have never witnessed. They are relentless." Vraxis folded his arms, unimpressed. "The Drask are warriors. You were bred for conquest. Are you saying you have been outmatched by a species barely capable of interstellar travel?" The Drask warlord let out a bitter laugh, his sharp teeth bared. "Outmatched?" He leaned forward. "We were hunted. We took their cities and they turned them into traps. We cut off their supply lines and they made do with nothing. We tried to demoralize them, and instead, we are the ones who lost hope." Another report flashed onto the display. A fleet of Drask warships, the largest reinforcement fleet sent to reclaim their losses, had been completely annihilated, not by superior firepower, not by overwhelming numbers, by humans. There was no single decisive battle that had turned the war in their favor. Instead, it had been hundreds of small victories, relentless and unyielding. One by one, the Drask had been bled dry, stretched beyond their limits, shattered from within. The humans had refused to meet them in open combat because they didn't need to. One of the council members, an elder from the Vakari swarm, clicked their mandibles nervously. "Are you saying there is no path to victory?" Krelvok's jaw clenched. "There is only one path left," he said grimly. "Surrender." A heavy silence fell over the chamber. For the first time in known galactic history, a dominant military empire was preparing to surrender to a species the council had dismissed as insignificant. The speaker's voice wavered slightly. "And if you do not surrender?" Krelvok exhaled, closing his eyes briefly. "Then we will cease to exist. The humans will not stop until they have erased our fleets, our armies, our rule. Not out of conquest, not out of greed, but because we gave them no choice. A new transmission interrupted the discussion. The council members turned as a human face appeared on the central display. It was Ambassador Daniel Reeves. His expression was calm, cold, and impossible to read. Vraxis sat up straighter, his expression unreadable. Ambassador Reeves. Reeves regarded him for a moment before speaking. This war was never ours to begin with, he said simply. We did not seek conquest. We did not strike first. His voice remained steady, but there was something in his tone, something that sent an uneasy chill through the chamber. You wanted to test us, Reeves continued. You wanted to see how long we could last. He leaned forward slightly. You have your answer. The weight of his words settled over the council like a crushing force. Vraxis forced a smirk, trying to mask his unease. And what do you want now, Ambassador? Revenge? To burn the Drask homeworld as they tried to do to yours? Reeves did not blink. No. He let the silence stretch. We want you to understand. The chamber was still. We were never weak, Reeves said. You just never pushed us far enough. The transmission ended. The hologram flickered out, and the council was left in silence. The council had no choice but to accept. When Reeves returned to his ship, the weight of the moment finally settled in. He stood at the viewport, watching the endless expanse of space stretch before him. Earth was safe. The Drask had fallen, and the galaxy now understood what it meant to provoke humanity. He was joined by Admiral Kate Holloway, the woman who had coordinated Earth's military response throughout the war. She folded her arms, watching the distant stars. So, we did it, she said. No more restrictions, no more leash. Reeves nodded. No more underestimation. She let out a slow breath. Do you think they'll try again? Reeves was silent for a moment, then shook his head. No. His eyes darkened slightly. They're afraid. Holloway smirked. Good. They stood in silence, staring into the stars. The war was over, but the galaxy would never forget. Humanity had proven itself, and now the universe would think twice before crossing them again. The council chamber was filled with representatives from every major species in the galaxy. The air was thick with unease. The war with the Drask had ended, but something far greater had changed. Humanity had taken its place, not by diplomatic negotiations, not by pleading for recognition, but by proving beyond doubt that they belonged. Ambassador Daniel Reeves stood at the center of the chamber, facing the most powerful beings in the known universe. The holographic broadcast extended far beyond the walls of this great hall, millions of worlds, countless civilizations, all watching. The galaxy held its breath. Reeves took a deep breath before speaking. Members of the council, leaders of the great civilizations of this galaxy, I stand before you not as a conqueror, not as a ruler, but as a representative of my people. My words are not threats, not demands, but truths that you must all understand. His voice was calm, measured, but carried the weight of the war that had just ended. Humanity never wanted war. We never sought to expand our borders through conquest. We did not come into the stars looking for conflict. We came in search of knowledge, of unity, of a place among the great civilizations of this galaxy. He paused for a moment, letting the silence settle before continuing. But the war with the Drask was not a war of our choosing. It was forced upon us. Our world was invaded. Our people were hunted. We were left with no choice but to fight. And fight we did. The chamber remained silent, yet tension rippled through it. The council members knew exactly what had happened. They had allowed the war. Some had even encouraged it, and now they were witnessing the consequences. We were supposed to be weak, Reeves continued, his eyes scanning the room. We were supposed to fall in days. That was the expectation. That was the mistake. The words echoed through the chamber, through every transmission reaching every corner of known space. You have seen what happens when humanity is threatened. You have witnessed what we are capable of. You have learned that we do not surrender, we do not retreat, and we do not forget. A hush spread through the council as he stepped forward. His next words were spoken slowly, deliberately, with absolute certainty. We will not seek war. We will not expand through force. We do not desire to rule over others. But if you bring war to us again, if you attempt to take what is ours, if you think that what happened to the Drask was a mistake or a fluke, he let the pause stretch. Know this, there will not be a second chance. A ripple passed through the chamber. Some of the older species shifted uncomfortably, their postures betraying their unease. Others remained still, their minds processing the gravity of what had just been spoken. The warning was clear. The Drask had pushed humanity into a war, expecting them to crumble. Instead, they had been destroyed. If anyone else tried to do the same, the result would be final. Reeves let the silence linger before continuing, his tone softening slightly. Humanity is not your enemy. We do not seek vengeance. We do not hold grudges. We understand the mistakes that were made, but we will not tolerate them again. He looked around, letting his words settle. The galaxy is vast, and there is room for all of us to thrive. Let us move forward in peace, in understanding. But if you force our hand again, know that we will not hold back. He inclined his head slightly, a show of respect, but also a display of control. He had said everything that needed to be said. The transmission ended. The council chamber remained silent. For the first time in its long history, the ruling powers of the galaxy truly understood the cost of underestimating humanity. News of the speech spread quickly. Across the galaxy, entire civilizations reacted. Some in fear, some in awe, some in quiet contemplation.